Sarah Martinez stepped into the first-class cabin of Flight 447 with quiet dignity, her simple blue dress and worn leather shoes a stark contrast to the designer outfits surrounding her. At 32, she carried herself with an understated grace that spoke of inner strength rather than outward display. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore no jewelry except for a small silver cross that caught the cabin lights as she moved. The upgrade had been unexpected. Sarah had been sitting in economy when a flight attendant approached her with a warm smile, explaining that they had a seat available in first class. Sarah had politely declined at first, insisting she was perfectly comfortable where she was, but the attendant had been persistent, mentioning something about wanting to honor service members during Military Appreciation Month. As Sarah made her way down the aisle, she couldn't help but notice the stares. The other passengers in first class were clearly wealthy. Their clothes, watches, and accessories screamed money. There was a man in an expensive suit talking loudly on his phone about a $1 million deal, a woman dripping in diamonds who kept checking her reflection in a compact mirror, and a group of young professionals who looked like they owned the world. Sarah found her seat, 3A, and quietly stowed her simple black backpack in the overhead compartment. The bag was military-issued, though few would recognize it as such given its plain appearance. She had deliberately chosen civilian clothes for her journey home, wanting to blend in and avoid the attention that sometimes came with wearing her uniform. The woman in the seat next to her, adorned in a fur coat despite the warm weather, looked Sarah up and down with obvious disdain. "Excuse me," the woman said in a voice that dripped with condescension. "I think there might be some mistake. This is first class." Sarah turned to face her with a patient smile. "Yes, I know. The flight attendant moved me here." The fur-coated woman's eyes narrowed. "Well, I'm sure it was some kind of error. First-class tickets cost thousands of dollars. Perhaps you should go back to your original seat before this becomes embarrassing." Other passengers began to take notice of the conversation. The businessman ended his phone call and turned to watch. The diamond-laden woman stopped applying her lipstick. Even the young professionals paused their animated discussion about their latest startup venture. Sarah remained calm, her voice steady and polite. "The flight attendant specifically brought me here. I have my boarding pass if you'd like to see it." The fur-coated woman laughed, a sharp sound that carried across the cabin. "Oh, honey, I'm sure you do. But look around you. Do you really think you belong here? That dress looks like it came from a discount store, and those shoes have seen better days. This cabin is for people who can actually afford to be here." The businessman chimed in with a smirk. Maybe she won one of those charity contests. You know, fly like the rich for a day or something like that. The group of young professionals found this hilarious. One of them, a blonde woman with perfectly manicured nails, giggled loudly. Or maybe she's somebody's maid who got confused about which cabin she was supposed to clean. Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with being underestimated, but she had learned long ago not to let such comments affect her outward composure. She had faced far worse than a group of entitled passengers on an airplane. In the mountains of Afghanistan, she had led missions under enemy fire. In the deserts of Iraq, she had made life-and-death decisions that saved countless lives. These people's opinions meant nothing to her. "I understand your confusion," Sarah said quietly, "but I assure you I'm in the right place." The diamond woman leaned forward from across the aisle. "What do you do for work, dear? Are you a waitress?" "A shop girl. I'm just curious how someone in your situation ended up in first class." Sarah could have told them. She could have mentioned that she was a decorated Army Ranger, one of only a few women to ever earn that designation. She could have explained about the Purple Heart in her backpack, or the Bronze Star, or the countless commendations for valor under fire. She could have described the 3 tours of duty, the lives she had saved, the mission she had completed when others said it was impossible. Instead, she simply said, "I serve my country." The fur-coated woman burst into laughter again. "Oh, that's precious. What are you, some kind of government clerk? A post office worker? Honey, that's not exactly first-class material." The businessman nodded in agreement. "Look, I pay more in taxes in a month than most people make in a year. I think I know who deserves to be in first class. And it's not someone who probably makes minimum wage pushing papers around some government office." The young professionals were recording now, one of them holding up her phone to capture what they clearly thought was an amusing situation. "This is going straight to social media," she announced. "Rich people versus reality. This is comedy gold. Sarah noticed the flight attendant who had originally moved her approaching with a concerned expression. The woman whose name tag read Jennifer had been nothing but kind to Sarah from the moment she boarded. Jennifer had recognized something in Sarah's bearing, something that spoke of service and sacrifice, though she hadn't yet put her finger on exactly what it was. "Is everything all right here?" Jennifer asked, her voice professional but warm. The fur-coated woman immediately pounced. "Yes, there's definitely a problem. This woman is clearly in the wrong section. I'm sure she's a lovely person, but she obviously doesn't belong in first class. Could you please help her find her proper seat?" Jennifer looked at Sarah, who met her gaze with steady eyes. There was something about this woman that Jennifer couldn't shake. The way she held herself, the calm dignity in the face of such rudeness, the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her. It all reminded Jennifer of her brother, who had served in the military before coming home with stories of incredible people he had met in the service. "Ma'am," Jennifer said to Sarah, "may I see your boarding pass again?" Sarah handed it over without hesitation. Jennifer studied it carefully, noting not just the seat assignment but also the special code that had prompted the original upgrade. Her eyes widened slightly as she recognized what it meant. "Everything appears to be in order," Jennifer announced to the cabin. "This passenger is exactly where she's supposed to be." The businessman scoffed. "Look, I don't want to cause a scene, but I pay good money for first class because I want to travel with people of a certain caliber. Not to be rude, but this woman clearly isn't in our league." As the tension in the cabin continued to build, none of the mocking passengers noticed that Jennifer had discreetly pressed a button to alert the cockpit. Captain Williams, a former Navy pilot himself, had a policy about how service members were treated on his flights. He was about to learn something that would change the entire dynamic of this journey. The mockery escalated as more passengers joined in the cruel entertainment. A man in his 50s wearing a Rolex that probably cost more than most people's cars decided to add his voice to the chorus of disdain. He had been quietly observing from his seat in 2B, sipping champagne and reading the Wall Street Journal, but the commotion had drawn his attention. "You know what I think happened here?" he announced loudly, clearly enjoying having an audience. "I bet she found someone's lost boarding pass and decided to try her luck. Security isn't what it used to be these days." The accusation hit the cabin like a thunderclap. Several passengers gasped, and even those who had been ignoring the situation now turned to stare. The suggestion that Sarah was somehow flying fraudulently was a serious allegation, and the atmosphere grew thick with judgment and suspicion. Sarah felt a familiar surge of the calm that had carried her through countless dangerous situations. This was nothing compared to being pinned down by enemy fire while trying to evacuate wounded soldiers. But the injustice of it still stung. She had spent years defending the freedom of people exactly like these, people who now looked at her with such contempt. The young professional with the phone was practically bouncing with excitement. "Oh my God, this is even better than I thought. Should I call security? This could go viral." Jennifer, the flight attendant, felt her protective instincts kick in. There was something about Sarah that reminded her so much of her brother Marcus, who had come home from his deployment changed but stronger. Marcus had that same quiet dignity, that same way of carrying himself that spoke of having faced real challenges and emerged victorious. "Sir," Jennifer said firmly to the man with the Rolex, "I need to ask you to please return to your seat and lower your voice. There's no evidence of any wrongdoing here." The fur-coated woman wasn't finished, though. She had found her target and was determined to make the most of it. "Look at her," she said, gesturing dramatically at Sarah. "Really look at her. Does she look like someone who belongs in first class? That haircut probably cost $20 at a strip mall salon. Those clothes are clearly from some discount department store. And those hands, look at those hands. They're rough and calloused like someone who does manual labor." Sarah glanced down at her hands, the hands that had field-stripped weapons in complete darkness, administered first aid to wounded comrades, and climbed mountain faces while carrying 60 pounds of gear. The hands that had pulled 3 soldiers from a burning vehicle under enemy fire, earning her a medal she never talked about. The calluses and small scars were badges of honor she wore proudly, though she had never expected them to become ammunition for cruel strangers. "There's nothing wrong with honest work," Sarah said quietly, still maintaining her composure. "Whatever job someone has, if they do it with integrity, that's what matters." The businessman laughed mockingly. Integrity doesn't pay for first-class tickets, sweetheart. Money does, and it's pretty clear you don't have any. The diamond woman leaned forward again, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Honey, I'm sure you're a very nice person, but you have to understand how this looks. We pay premium prices for a premium experience. Part of that experience is traveling with our peers. People who understand proper etiquette and social expectations. What she's trying to say, added one of the young professionals, is that first class isn't just about the seat. It's about the whole environment. And frankly, you're disrupting that environment. Sarah noticed that not every passenger was participating in the mockery. An elderly gentleman in 4C was reading his book, but occasionally glancing up with disapproval at the behavior of his fellow first-class passengers. A middle-aged woman across the aisle looked uncomfortable with the situation, but seemed too intimidated to speak up. A young man in 1A had his headphones on but was clearly listening to every word, his expression growing more disgusted by the minute. But the vocal majority was becoming increasingly bold in their cruelty. The man with the Rolex had found a new angle of attack. You know what I bet happened? I bet she's running some kind of scam. Maybe she works for the airline and figured out how to game the system for a free upgrade. Or maybe she's got some sob story she told them about needing to get home for a family emergency. The fur-coated woman clapped her hands together. Oh, that's probably exactly it. One of those people who thinks the world owes them something because life has been hard. Well, newsflash, honey. Life is hard for everyone. The difference is, some of us work hard enough to earn our place in first class. Jennifer had heard enough. She pressed the call button again, this time with more urgency. In the cockpit, Captain Williams was just finishing his pre-flight checks when he received the second alert from the cabin. His co-pilot, a young woman named Lisa Chen, noticed his expression change. Everything okay, Captain? She asked. Apparently we have a situation in first class. Some passengers are giving another passenger a hard time. Captain Williams sighed. He had been flying commercial airlines for 15 years, and he had seen every kind of passenger behavior imaginable. But he had zero tolerance for people who bullied others, especially when his instincts told him there was more to the story. Back in the cabin, the situation was reaching a boiling point. The young professional with the phone had started a live stream, narrating the events for her followers. So basically, this woman is clearly in the wrong section, and instead of just admitting it and moving to economy where she belongs, she's being super stubborn about it. It's honestly kind of sad to watch. The businessman decided to take matters into his own hands. He stood up and approached Sarah's seat, his presence intimidating and aggressive. Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing here, but it needs to stop. You're making everyone uncomfortable, and frankly, you're embarrassing yourself. Why don't you just accept that you made a mistake and go back to your real seat? Sarah looked up at him calmly. She could have stood up. Even in civilian clothes, her military bearing was unmistakable when she chose to display it. She could have used the voice of command that had once ordered soldiers into battle. Instead, she simply said, "I'm not going anywhere." The simple statement, delivered with quiet confidence, seemed to infuriate the businessman even more. Who do you think you are? Do you have any idea who we are? I could buy and sell you 10 times over. I own 3 companies and employ hundreds of people. I deserve respect. Respect isn't something you can buy, Sarah replied, her voice never rising above a conversational tone. It's something you earn. The fur-coated woman let out a gasp of indignation. The audacity. Did you hear that? She's actually lecturing us about respect. This is unbelievable. As the verbal attacks continued, Jennifer made her way toward the cockpit. She had served on flights with many military personnel over the years, and something about Sarah's demeanor was setting off every instinct she had. The way the woman carried herself, the calm in the face of adversity, the calloused hands, the simple silver cross. It all pointed to someone who had served in more ways than the mocking passengers could possibly imagine. What none of them knew was that Captain Williams was about to receive information that would turn their cruel entertainment into the most humbling experience of their lives. Captain Williams received the 3rd alert from the cabin crew as he was completing his final systems check. This was unusual. Jennifer had been with the airline for 8 years and was known for handling difficult passengers with grace and professionalism. For her to call for assistance 3 times meant something serious was happening. He made his way through the aircraft, his pilot's uniform and captain's stripes immediately commanding attention from the passengers. At 48 years old, Captain Williams carried himself with the bearing of someone who had served his country before transitioning to commercial aviation. His Navy background had taught him to read people quickly and accurately, and he had developed a special sensitivity to recognizing fellow service members. As he approached the first-class cabin, he could hear the escalating voices before he could see the situation. The mockery was reaching new heights of cruelty, and he felt his jaw tighten with each cruel comment he overheard. "Maybe she's one of those stolen valor people," the businessman was saying. "You know, the ones who pretend to be veterans to get special treatment and discounts. I bet that's exactly what this is." The fur-coated woman nodded enthusiastically. "Oh, you're probably right. She probably has some fake military ID or something. These people will do anything for a free handout." Captain Williams paused at the entrance to first class, taking in the scene. He saw the woman they were tormenting, seated quietly in 3A, her posture straight despite the abuse being hurled at her. Even sitting down, there was something about her bearing that immediately caught his attention. The way she held her shoulders, the controlled breathing, the hands resting calmly in her lap despite the chaos around her. These were not the mannerisms of a civilian. His trained eye took in other details. The simple clothes that couldn't quite hide the athletic build underneath. The way her eyes constantly scanned the cabin, noting exits and potential threats. A habit that became second nature to those who had served in combat zones. The small silver cross at her throat, worn smooth from years of being touched during moments of stress or prayer. But it was her face that gave him pause. Despite the cruel words being thrown at her, despite the accusations and mockery, she maintained a dignity that spoke of having faced far worse challenges than a cabin full of entitled passengers. This was the face of someone who had looked danger in the eye and never blinked. Jennifer appeared at his elbow, her expression troubled. "Captain, I'm so sorry to keep calling, but this situation is getting out of hand. These passengers are being incredibly cruel to this woman, and I'm concerned about how far they might push it." Captain Williams nodded, his eyes never leaving Sarah. "What's her story, Jennifer? Why are they targeting her?" "She was upgraded from economy at the gate. It's Military Appreciation Month, and when I saw her boarding pass, there was a special service code that qualified her for the upgrade. But these passengers seem to think she doesn't belong in first class because of how she's dressed." The captain's eyes sharpened. "Service code? What kind of service code?" Jennifer lowered her voice. "I'm not entirely sure of the specifics, Captain. The gate agent just noted that she qualified for military appreciation upgrades. But looking at her now, watching how she's handling this situation..." Jennifer paused, studying Sarah's composed demeanor. "My brother served 3 tours overseas, and he has that same way about him. That same calm strength." Captain Williams felt a familiar tightness in his chest. As a former Navy pilot who had flown missions in Iraq, he had deep respect for anyone who had served regardless of branch or role. The idea that fellow Americans were tormenting someone who had potentially sacrificed for their freedom made his blood boil. The young professional with the phone was now doing a running commentary for her social media followers. "So basically this woman is totally delusional and thinks she belongs in first class with real successful people. It's actually kind of entertaining to watch someone be so completely clueless about their place in the world." The businessman had returned to his seat, but continued his verbal assault. "You know what really gets me? It's the entitlement. Like somehow the world owes her something just because she exists. Well, I've got news for you, lady. Success isn't handed out for free. Some of us actually worked for our achievements." Sarah finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear enough for everyone to hear. "You're right. Success isn't handed out for free. Neither is freedom." The simple statement hung in the air like a challenge. The businessman scoffed, but Captain Williams felt something click into place. That wasn't the response of someone who worked in a government office or cleaned buildings. That was the response of someone who understood the true cost of the freedoms these passengers took for granted. The fur-coated woman rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please. What's that supposed to mean? Are you going to lecture us about politics now? As if this day couldn't get any worse." "I'm not talking about politics," Sarah replied calmly. "I'm talking about service, about sacrifice, about doing things that are difficult and dangerous because they need to be done, even when nobody notices or appreciates it." The man with the Rolex laughed mockingly. "Listen to her. She's acting like she's some kind of hero. What did you do, volunteer at a soup kitchen? Help old ladies cross the street? Newsflash. That doesn't qualify you for first-class treatment. Captain Williams had heard enough. He stepped fully into the cabin, his presence immediately commanding attention. The mockery died down as passengers noticed the 4 stripes on his shoulders and the serious expression on his face. "Good afternoon, passengers," he said, his voice carrying the authority of command. "I'm Captain Williams, and I'll be flying you to your destination today. I understand there's been some confusion in this cabin." The businessman immediately stood up, extending his hand with a confident smile. "Captain, thank you for coming back here. We've been having a situation with a passenger who seems to be in the wrong section. I think there was some kind of mix-up with the seating assignments." Captain Williams ignored the extended hand, his eyes fixed on Sarah. Something about her was triggering every instinct he had developed during his years of military service. The way she met his gaze directly but respectfully, the subtle straightening of her posture when she saw his uniform, the barely perceptible nod of acknowledgement between service members. It all pointed to one unmistakable conclusion. "Ma'am," he said directly to Sarah, "I wonder if I might have a word with you privately." The fur-coated woman let out an exasperated sigh. "Captain, surely you're not going to indulge this charade any further. It's perfectly obvious what's happening here. This woman is clearly trying to scam her way into first class, and now she's probably going to spin some sob story to try to convince you to let her stay." Captain Williams turned to look at the woman, his expression cold enough to freeze water. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to please remain quiet while I sort this out." The young professional with the phone perked up with excitement. "Oh my God, this is perfect. The captain is totally going to kick her out. This is going to be the best content ever." But as Captain Williams studied Sarah's face more closely, he began to notice details that the other passengers had missed entirely. There was a small scar above her left eyebrow that looked like it came from shrapnel. Her hands, which the passengers had mocked for being rough and calloused, bore the kind of wear that came from handling weapons and equipment in harsh conditions. And there was something in her eyes, a depth that spoke of having seen things that most people couldn't imagine. "Ma'am," he said to Sarah again, "would you mind showing me your military ID?" The request for a military ID sent a ripple of shock through the first-class cabin. The businessman's confident smile faltered. The fur-coated woman's mouth fell open. The young professionals stopped their live streaming, suddenly uncertain about what they had been recording. Sarah reached into her simple black backpack and withdrew a leather wallet. From it, she pulled out a military identification card and handed it to Captain Williams. As he examined it, his face grew increasingly pale, and his hands began to shake slightly. The card read, "Martinez, Sarah Elena, Sergeant First Class, U.S. Army Rangers, 75th Ranger Regiment." But it was the additional information that made Captain Williams's breath catch in his throat. The service dates showed multiple deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. The security clearance level indicated someone who had been trusted with highly classified operations. But Captain Williams knew enough about military structure to understand what he was really looking at. The 75th Ranger Regiment was one of the most elite fighting forces in the American military. Rangers were the first to fight and the last to retreat. They undertook the most dangerous missions, often behind enemy lines with minimal support and maximum risk. And Sarah Martinez wasn't just any ranger. She was a female ranger, which meant she was part of an incredibly small and elite group. Women had only recently been allowed into ranger training, and the failure rate was astronomical. For a woman to not only complete ranger training but advance to sergeant first class meant she was among the most capable soldiers in the entire U.S. military. Captain Williams looked up from the ID card, his expression completely transformed. The casual authority he had carried into the cabin was replaced by something approaching awe. He was looking at a genuine American hero, someone who had likely saved lives and completed missions that would never be publicly acknowledged. "Sergeant Martinez," he said, his voice thick with respect, "it's an honor to have you aboard my aircraft." The first-class cabin fell into stunned silence. The businessman slowly sank back into his seat, his face turning red with embarrassment. The fur-coated woman seemed to shrink into herself, suddenly finding her manicured nails extremely interesting. The young professionals looked like they wanted to disappear entirely. Sarah took her ID back with the same quiet dignity she had maintained throughout the ordeal. "Thank you, Captain. I appreciate your service as well." Captain Williams noticed the way she phrased her response. acknowledging his service while deflecting attention from her own. It was typical of the Rangers he had known during his Navy days. They were warriors who preferred to let their actions speak rather than their words. "Sergeant, if you don't mind me asking, what was your specialty in the Rangers?" "Infantry. Special operations. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq." She paused, then added quietly, "Search and rescue primarily." The words hit Captain Williams like a physical blow. Search and rescue in Ranger terms meant going into the most dangerous situations imaginable to bring home wounded or captured soldiers. It meant fighting through enemy territory with minimal support to reach Americans who were counting on someone to risk everything for them. Jennifer, who had been standing nearby, felt tears prick her eyes. Her brother had told her stories about Rangers, how they never left anyone behind, how they would walk into hell itself to bring home a fellow soldier. Looking at Sarah now, she understood why her brother spoke of such people with reverence. The businessman cleared his throat nervously. I had no idea. I mean, how are we supposed to know?" Captain Williams turned to face the man, his expression glacial. "How are you supposed to know? By not making assumptions about people based on their appearance, by treating fellow human beings with basic respect and dignity." The fur-coated woman tried to salvage the situation. "Well, obviously, if we had known she was military, we never would have said anything." "We support our troops completely." "Do you?" Captain Williams asked, his voice cutting. "Because from what I observed, you were perfectly happy to mock and humiliate someone you thought was beneath you. The fact that she's a decorated war hero doesn't change the cruelty of your behavior. It just makes it more shameful." Sarah spoke up quietly. "Captain, it's really not necessary to—" "Sergeant, with respect, it absolutely is necessary." Captain Williams's voice carried the authority of command. "These passengers need to understand exactly who they were attacking." He turned back to face the cabin, his expression stern. "This woman is Sergeant First Class Sarah Martinez of the 75th Ranger Regiment. Do you understand what that means? The Rangers are the elite of the elite. They undertake the most dangerous missions in the most hostile environments. They're the first ones called when a situation is impossible, when nobody else can get the job done." The young professional who had been live streaming slowly lowered her phone. The reality of what she had been broadcasting beginning to sink in. I didn't know." "I'm so sorry," Captain Williams wasn't finished. "Sergeant Martinez has completed 5 combat deployments. She's been in firefights that most of us can't imagine. She saved lives under enemy fire. She's carried wounded soldiers to safety while being shot at. And she's done all of this not for money or recognition, but because she believed in something bigger than herself." The businessman tried to interrupt. "Captain, I think we all understand now that there was a misunderstanding." "No," Captain Williams cut him off sharply. "There was no misunderstanding. You saw someone you judged to be beneath your social status, and you decided to humiliate her for your own entertainment. The fact that she happens to be an American hero just makes your behavior more disgusting." Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat. This kind of attention was exactly what she had hoped to avoid by wearing civilian clothes. She had learned long ago that people treated her differently when they knew about her service record, and she preferred to be judged on her present actions rather than her past achievements. "Captain," she said quietly, "I really don't need—" "Sergeant, you've spent years putting your life on the line for people who don't even know your name. The least I can do is make sure these passengers understand what real service looks like." The elderly gentleman in 4C finally spoke up. Throughout the entire ordeal, he had remained silent, but now he stood slowly and turned to face Sarah. "Sergeant Martinez, I'm Colonel Robert Hayes, U.S. Marine Corps, retired. I want to personally apologize for the behavior of these civilians. You deserve far better treatment than what you received today." Sarah stood and snapped to attention, offering a crisp salute. "Colonel, sir?" Colonel Hayes returned the salute with obvious pride. "At ease, Sergeant." "The honor is mine." He turned to address the other passengers, his voice carrying the weight of 40 years of military leadership. "I've been listening to this disgraceful display for the past 30 minutes, and I want you all to understand something. This woman has done more for your freedom in a single deployment than most of you will do in your entire lives." The cabin was completely silent now, except for the ambient noise of the aircraft's engines. The mockery and laughter had been replaced by a heavy sense of shame and embarrassment. Captain Williams looked around the cabin one more time. "I want to make something very clear to everyone. Sergeant Martinez will be treated with the respect and dignity she has earned, through her service to this country. Anyone who has a problem with that can discuss it with me personally. As he prepared to return to the cockpit, Captain Williams had one more surprise that would forever change how these passengers viewed service and sacrifice. Captain Williams paused at the entrance to the cockpit, then turned back to face the cabin. The weight of memory was heavy in his eyes as he looked at Sarah, and the other passengers could sense that something profound was about to be shared. "Sergeant Martinez," he said, his voice carrying a different tone now, not just respect but something deeper. "I wonder if I might ask you something personal. Were you ever involved in operations in the Kandahar province, specifically around Forward Operating Base Chapman circa 2018? Sarah's composure, which had remained steady throughout all the mockery and humiliation, finally showed a crack. Her eyes widened slightly, and she straightened in her seat. "Yes, sir. I was stationed there for 8 months during my 3rd deployment." Captain Williams nodded slowly, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "Then there's something I need to tell you, and something these passengers need to hear." The businessman, who had been hoping the confrontation was over, shifted uncomfortably. The fur-coated woman looked like she wanted to disappear, but everyone in the cabin was transfixed by the obvious emotion in the captain's voice. "In September 2018, I was piloting a Navy helicopter on a medical evacuation mission. We had been called to extract wounded soldiers from a compound that was under heavy enemy fire. The Rangers had been ambushed during what should have been a routine patrol, and several men were critically wounded." Sarah felt her heart begin to race. She remembered that mission with crystal clarity. It had been one of the worst firefights of her deployment. Captain Williams continued. His eyes locked on Sarah's. "When we arrived at the landing zone, the situation was chaos. The Rangers were pinned down by enemy fire from 3 different directions. The wounded were in an exposed position, and it looked like an impossible extraction. The enemy had the landing zone covered, and we were taking heavy fire. The first-class cabin was completely silent. Even the businessman had stopped checking his phone. The young professionals were staring in amazement, beginning to understand that they were witnessing something extraordinary. As we hovered over the compound, I could see the Rangers below trying to move their wounded to safety. But there was one soldier, one Ranger, who kept exposing herself to enemy fire to drag wounded men to the evacuation point. Every time we thought she was going to take cover, she went back for another soldier." Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the weight of Corporal Johnson as she dragged him across 50 yards of open ground while bullets snapped over her head. Then Private Martinez, no relation despite the shared name, who had taken shrapnel to the chest and couldn't move on his own. Then Sergeant Williams, who had been hit in the leg and was bleeding badly. That Ranger made 4 trips across open ground under heavy enemy fire. 4 trips. Each time I thought we were about to watch her die. But she kept going back. She wouldn't leave anyone behind. Captain Williams paused, struggling with the emotion of the memory. "Because of that Ranger's actions, we were able to extract all 6 wounded soldiers. Every single one of them survived. Every single one of them went home to their families." The fur-coated woman felt tears beginning to form in her eyes as the magnitude of what she was hearing sank in. This woman she had mocked, this person she had treated with such contempt, had risked her life to save others. "I've been flying for 23 years, Captain Williams continued. "I've seen a lot of brave actions, a lot of heroic people, but I have never in my entire career witnessed anything like what that Ranger did that day. The courage, the determination, the absolute refusal to leave anyone behind. It was the most heroic thing I've ever witnessed." He looked directly at Sarah, his voice breaking slightly. "I never knew that Ranger's name. I never got the chance to thank her. But I never forgot her face, and I never forgot what she did." "Sergeant Martinez, was that you?" Sarah met his gaze, and for the first time since boarding the aircraft, her composure truly cracked. A single tear rolled down her cheek as she nodded. "Yes, sir. That was me." The cabin erupted in stunned silence so profound that the only sound was the gentle hum of the aircraft's engines. Captain Williams stood there for a moment, overwhelmed by the realization that he was finally face to face with the hero he had thought about countless times over the past 7 years. "Sergeant Martinez," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you saved 6 lives that day. 6 American soldiers went home to their families because of what you did. One of them was a 19-year-old kid from Ohio who became a father 2 months later. Another was a man 3 weeks away from retirement who got to hold his grandchildren. A third was a soldier who went on to become a teacher and has influenced hundreds of students. Sarah wiped away the tear, struggling to maintain her composure. They were my brothers, sir. We don't leave anyone behind. That's not heroism. That's just doing the job. No, Sergeant, Captain Williams said firmly. That was heroism of the highest order. And every person in this cabin needs to understand what real courage looks like. The businessman sat in his seat, his face pale and his hands shaking. He thought about his own life, his own challenges, his own definition of bravery. Closing a difficult business deal suddenly seemed trivial compared to running across open ground under enemy fire to save wounded soldiers. The fur-coated woman was openly crying now, her expensive makeup running down her cheeks. She thought about all the times she had complained about her problems, all the times she had demanded special treatment because of her wealth. Compared to what this quiet woman had done, her entire life seemed shallow and meaningless. The young professional who had been live streaming slowly deleted the video she had recorded. The thought of posting mockery of a genuine American hero made her physically sick. She looked at Sarah with newfound respect and deep shame. Colonel Hayes stood up again, his weathered face filled with pride and emotion. Ladies and gentlemen, you have just learned that you've been sharing this cabin with a genuine American hero. Sergeant Martinez represents the very best of our military and the very best of our country. Jennifer, the flight attendant, finally understood why Sarah had seemed so familiar, why her bearing had reminded her so much of her brother. Sarah carried herself like someone who had faced the ultimate test and passed with flying colors. Captain Williams wasn't finished with his story. There's something else you all need to know. After that mission, I wrote a commendation letter, recommending that ranger for the Silver Star. The courage she displayed that day was beyond anything required by duty, and it was the kind of selfless heroism that defines the very best of American military service. Sarah looked uncomfortable with the attention, but Captain Williams continued. The Silver Star is the third highest military decoration for valor in combat. It's awarded for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. What Sergeant Martinez did that day earned her one of our nation's highest honors. The weight of this revelation settled over the cabin like a heavy blanket. The passengers who had spent the last hour mocking and humiliating Sarah suddenly understood the full magnitude of their behavior. They had been cruel to someone who had literally risked her life to save others, someone who had been decorated for extraordinary heroism. Captain Williams looked around the cabin one final time. I want everyone here to understand something. This woman has given more to this country than most of us will ever be asked to give. She has faced dangers that most of us can't even imagine. She has saved lives and served with distinction in some of the most dangerous places on earth. He paused, letting his words sink in. And yet when you attacked her character, questioned her right to be here, and mocked her appearance, she responded with dignity and grace. Even now, after everything you've put her through, she's not asking for apologies or special treatment. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what real class looks like. The businessman finally found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. Sergeant Martinez, I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry. I'm so ashamed. But Captain Williams held up his hand, stopping the apology. He had one more thing to share that would complete the picture of exactly who Sarah Martinez really was. Captain Williams held up his hand, stopping the businessman's attempt at an apology. Before anyone says anything else, there's more you need to know about Sergeant Martinez. The Silver Star I mentioned? That wasn't her only decoration. Sarah looked increasingly uncomfortable, but the captain pressed on. Sergeant, would you mind if I shared the rest of your service record with these passengers? I think they need to understand the full scope of who they were attacking. Sarah hesitated, clearly preferring to keep her achievements private, but finally nodded reluctantly. If you think it's necessary, sir. Captain Williams took a deep breath. In addition to the Silver Star, Sergeant Martinez has been awarded the Purple Heart for wounds received in action, the Bronze Star with V device for valor, the Combat Infantry Badge, and the Ranger Tab. She has 5 combat deployments, 3 combat jumps, and has been credited with directly saving the lives of 17 American soldiers during her service. The numbers hit the cabin like hammer blows. 17 lives saved, 5 combat deployments. Each decoration represented acts of courage and sacrifice that most people couldn't comprehend. But perhaps most importantly, Captain Williams continued, Sergeant Martinez was one of only 12 women to successfully complete the full Ranger training program and earn the Ranger Tab. The physical and mental demands of that program break most men who attempt it. The fact that she not only completed it but excelled in combat operations afterward makes her part of an extraordinarily elite group of warriors. Colonel Hayes nodded in agreement. Ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at someone who represents less than 1% of our military. The Rangers are already an elite unit, and female Rangers are almost impossibly rare. Sergeant Martinez is quite literally one of the most qualified soldiers in the entire United States Army. The young professional who had been recording earlier finally found her voice. I posted some of this on social media before I realized, oh God, I'm so sorry. I deleted everything, but some people might have seen it. I feel sick about this, Sarah spoke quietly. Social media isn't important. What matters is that people learn from this experience. Her grace in the face of such humiliation only made the passengers feel worse about their behavior. The fur-coated woman was sobbing openly now, overwhelmed by the magnitude of her cruelty towards someone who had sacrificed so much for others. Captain Williams had one final revelation that would complete the picture. There's something else you should know about why Sergeant Martinez is on this flight today. She's not traveling for vacation or business. She's returning home from Walter Reed Medical Center, where she's been undergoing treatment for injuries sustained during her final deployment. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she didn't contradict him. This was information she had hoped to keep private, but the captain clearly felt it was necessary for the passengers to understand the full context. 6 months ago, Sergeant Martinez was leading a rescue operation to extract civilians from a compound that had been overrun by enemy forces. During the operation, an improvised explosive device detonated near her position. She sustained significant injuries to her left leg and suffered a concussion that required months of treatment. The cabin fell into an even deeper silence. The passengers were beginning to understand that they had been mocking someone who had been wounded in service to their country, someone who was likely still dealing with the physical and emotional aftermath of that experience. Despite her injuries, Captain Williams continued. Sergeant Martinez insisted on completing the mission. She helped evacuate 12 civilians, including 4 children, before finally accepting medical treatment for herself. That operation was her final active duty mission before being medically retired from the Army. Jennifer stepped forward, her voice thick with emotion. Sergeant Martinez, on behalf of everyone at this airline, I want to apologize for what you've endured today. You deserve so much better than this. The businessman stood up slowly, his face red with shame. Sergeant Martinez, I've never been so wrong about anything in my life. I don't know how to apologize for what I said, what I did. You're everything I'm not. Brave, selfless, honorable. I'm so sorry. The fur-coated woman tried to speak through her tears. I feel so ashamed. I've never done anything important in my life. Never helped anyone, never sacrificed anything. And I had the audacity to look down on you? I'm so sorry. One by one, the other passengers who had participated in the mockery offered their apologies. Each one was heartfelt. Each one was filled with genuine remorse. And each one was accepted by Sarah with the same grace she had shown throughout the entire ordeal. But Captain Williams wasn't quite finished. He reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out his phone. Sergeant Martinez, there's one more thing. After that mission in 2018, I kept in touch with some of the soldiers who were on that helicopter. I'd like to read you something. He scrolled through his messages and found what he was looking for. This is from Staff Sergeant Michael Johnson. He was the first soldier you pulled to safety that day. He wrote this last year on the anniversary of the mission. Captain Williams cleared his throat and began to read. I think about that day a lot. I think about how I was lying there, bleeding, thinking I was going to die in that compound. And then this ranger, this warrior, came out of nowhere and dragged me to safety. She didn't know me, didn't owe me anything, but she risked her life to save mine. I got to see my daughter take her first steps because of what that soldier did. I got to walk my wife to her college graduation. I got to hold my son when he was born. Every good thing in my life since that day exists because someone I didn't even know was willing to die for me. That's what a hero looks like. By now, there wasn't a dry eye in the first-class cabin. Even the passengers who hadn't participated in the mockery were moved to tears by the story they were hearing. Sarah wiped away another tear, clearly struggling with the emotional weight of hearing such words. Staff Sergeant Johnson was a good soldier. He would have done the same for me. Maybe, Captain Williams said. But you were the one who actually did it. You were the one who made the choice to risk everything for others. And that choice multiplied by countless similar choices throughout your service is what makes you a hero. As the emotional weight of the revelation settled over the cabin, the passengers began to understand that they had witnessed something extraordinary. They had seen true character in action, not just Sarah's heroism in combat, but her grace under pressure, her dignity in the face of cruelty, and her willingness to forgive those who had wronged her. But the story wasn't over yet. Captain Williams had one final gesture that would ensure this flight would be remembered for the rest of their lives. Captain Williams walked back to the aircraft's intercom system and picked up the microphone. His voice, when it came through the cabin speakers, was filled with pride and emotion that reached every passenger on the plane. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I want to take a moment to tell you about a very special passenger we have on board today. In our first-class cabin, we have the honor of flying with Sergeant First Class Sarah Martinez, a decorated Army Ranger who has served our country with extraordinary distinction. Throughout the aircraft, passengers looked up from their books, phones, and conversations, sensing something important was happening. Sergeant Martinez has completed 5 combat deployments, earned the Silver Star for gallantry in action, and has been personally responsible for saving 17 American lives during her service. She represents the very best of our military and the very best of our country. In first class, Sarah looked increasingly uncomfortable with the attention, but Captain Williams caught her eye and gave her a slight nod that said this was necessary and important. 7 years ago, I had the privilege of participating in a mission where I witnessed Sergeant Martinez's heroism firsthand. She risked her life repeatedly to save wounded soldiers, and because of her courage, 6 American warriors went home to their families. Today, I finally have the chance to properly thank her for her service and her sacrifice. The captain's voice grew stronger, filled with conviction. I want everyone on this aircraft to understand that we are sharing this flight with a genuine American hero. Someone who has given everything in service to our nation, who has been wounded in combat, and who continues to demonstrate the values of honor, courage, and selflessness that make our country great. Throughout the aircraft, passengers began to applaud. It started softly in the economy section and grew louder as more people joined in. Within moments, the entire plane was thundering with applause that seemed to shake the aircraft itself. In first class, the passengers who had earlier mocked Sarah were now applauding the loudest. The businessman was standing and clapping with tears streaming down his face. The fur-coated woman had removed her expensive sunglasses to wipe away tears as she applauded. The young professionals were standing and cheering, their earlier cruelty replaced by genuine admiration and deep shame. Captain Williams continued over the applause. Sergeant Martinez, on behalf of everyone on this aircraft, and on behalf of a grateful nation, thank you for your service, thank you for your sacrifice, and thank you for representing the very best of who we are as Americans. The applause continued for nearly 5 minutes, waves of appreciation rolling through the aircraft. Sarah, overwhelmed by the response, finally stood and turned to acknowledge the passengers behind her. Her simple gesture of recognition only intensified the applause. When the ovation finally died down, Captain Williams made one final announcement. Sergeant Martinez, your flight today is compliments of our airline. It is the least we can do to honor your service. Additionally, you will be our guest for any future flights you choose to take with us. Jennifer approached Sarah with a first-class meal service that had been specially prepared. Sergeant Martinez, this is our finest meal service, and it comes with the profound gratitude of our entire crew. As the flight continued, something remarkable began to happen. Passengers from throughout the aircraft started coming forward to shake Sarah's hand, to thank her for her service and to take pictures with her. Each interaction was filled with respect and genuine appreciation. The businessman, who had been so cruel earlier, approached Sarah with obvious nervousness. Sergeant Martinez, I know I already apologized, but I need to say more. I've been thinking about my life, about what I consider important, about what I think makes someone valuable. You've shown me how wrong I've been about everything. He paused, struggling with his emotions. I make a lot of money. I own expensive things. I travel first class because I can afford to. But I've never done anything that matters. I've never helped anyone. I've never sacrificed anything for someone else. And yet I had the arrogance to look down on you? I'm so ashamed. Sarah looked at him with kindness. Everyone serves in different ways. The important thing is that we learn from our experiences and try to be better. The fur-coated woman approached next, her expensive outfit looking somehow less important than it had hours earlier. Sergeant Martinez, I've been thinking about my children. I have 2 daughters, and I've been teaching them that success means having money and nice things. But after today, I want to teach them about real success, about service, about sacrifice, about putting others before yourself. She pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a picture of 2 young girls. Would you mind if I told them about you? About what real heroism looks like? Sarah smiled genuinely for the first time since boarding the aircraft. I'd be honored. Colonel Hayes approached one final time carrying something in his hands. Sergeant Martinez, I have something for you. He handed her a small wooden box. This contains my father's Purple Heart. He earned it at Normandy in 1944. I've carried it with me for 30 years, and I want you to have it. One warrior to another. Sarah tried to refuse the gift, but Colonel Hayes insisted. Sergeant, you represent the same values my father fought for. The same courage, the same willingness to sacrifice for others. He would be honored to know that his medal was being carried by someone like you. As the flight prepared for landing, Captain Williams made one final gesture. Over the intercom, he announced that Sergeant Martinez would be the first passenger to deplane, and that the entire crew would stand at attention to honor her as she left the aircraft. When the plane touched down and reached the gate, true to his word, Captain Williams and the entire flight crew stood in formation as Sarah gathered her simple belongings. As she walked toward the exit, every passenger on the aircraft stood and applauded again. The young professional who had been recording earlier stopped Sarah at the door. Sergeant Martinez, I deleted that awful video I took, but would you mind if I recorded a new one? Something that shows who you really are? Something that honors your service? Sarah considered for a moment, then nodded. If it helps people understand that we shouldn't judge others based on appearances, then yes. As Sarah walked off the aircraft, she was greeted by airport personnel who had heard about what happened during the flight. Word had spread quickly, and several military veterans who worked at the airport had gathered to show their respect. The passengers who had mocked her hours earlier watched from the windows as Sarah was greeted with honor and respect. They understood now that they had witnessed something profound, not just the revelation of who Sarah really was, but a lesson about the danger of judging others, the importance of treating everyone with dignity, and the reality that heroes walk among us every day, often unrecognized and unappreciated. As the passengers gathered their belongings and prepared to continue their journeys, each carried with them a story they would never forget. They had learned that true class isn't about money or possessions, but about character and integrity. They had seen real heroism, real sacrifice, and real grace under pressure. And Sarah Martinez, the modest woman they had mocked at the beginning of the flight, had taught them the most valuable lesson of all, that the measure of a person isn't found in their appearance or their wealth, but in their willingness to serve something greater than themselves. The businessmen would later establish a scholarship fund for military families. The fur-coated woman would begin volunteering at a veterans hospital. The young professionals would dedicate their social media platforms to honoring service members and promoting respect for all people. And Captain Williams would carry the memory of finally meeting his hero, finally being able to say thank you to the ranger who had shown him what true courage looked like on that day in Afghanistan, 7 years earlier. The flight had begun with cruelty and mockery, but it ended with understanding, respect, and a profound appreciation for those who serve in silence, asking for nothing in return except the chance to make a difference in the world.